a RotoViz Overtime listener mailbag, or today's edition of RotoViz OT, coming to you a little bit later in the week than we generally push out the first show of the week. Myself and Shawn had some scheduling to plan things out, but we have been able to come together to bring you this edition. I'm excited to get to sit down with Shawn and run through some of the listener questions, or maybe topics or players that we haven't discussed a lot in recent times. I do want to highlight, we did talk with Scott Barrett last week. We did two shows with him looking through a lot of the NFL draft prospects, lots of positive feedback on that. I would highly recommend heading back and checking that out if you haven't listened in already. And of course, if you are subscribed to the podcast feed, you get all those shows once they're available. So I would highly recommend doing that. And while you're there, drop us a written review. We'd really appreciate that. I also had Theo Greminger on from Fantasy Points on Monday on the RotoViz flagship show, the RotoViz Fantasy Football Podcast. Two shows with him this week, so head on over and check those out. I did post one of those as kind of a preview show, just to remind everybody that I'm recording those over on that channel. To make sure you head on over and subscribe so you can check those out as well with Theo. Lord Reeves or Rich Rebar coming on next week, so excited to get him on over there. But Shawn, it is a week or so since we last got to have a conversation. How are you doing? I know you just finished up, I sneaked behind the curtain, just finished up a Stealing Bananas with Ben Gretz, so Shawn's busy on the podcast front today, but how's things over there?
Good. We're closing in now. Draft only a handful of weeks away.
Are you at the point where you're like, I want it to be here, I'm ready for it?
No, I don't think so. We want to have this time before the draft that in many ways is, I mean, Colm, we still have lots of very exploitable holes in ADP for people participating in the FFPC's Never Too Early contest. We have plenty of great trade opportunities in Dynasty.
And to jump in, Shawn, I did notice there is an uptick over the last 2 weeks in listeners reaching out to say they're itching for some listener leagues. So if people are out there and they're interested in listener leagues, I know myself and Kevin Safranik were planning to do some listener leagues as well. So if you are interested in drafting with me and Shawn or me and Kevin, do reach out. We will be getting some of them set up in the coming weeks here.
So this is a great time of year. Once the draft is done, then we don't get it again for a year, Colm. So we want to maintain that sense of anticipation as long as we can, maintain that anticipation for the Dynasty rookie drafts. Best couple of weeks, we can wait for them. We don't want to have everything too early, too fast. But Colm, we've got some fun listener questions today as the NFL continues to grind all season long. And as I just mentioned, opportunities to make some savvy moves potentially. What are we hearing from NFL sources during it's a very puff PC time of the season?
Yeah, and I don't have this on the show sheet as a listener question, Shawn, but it was something that me and Theo talked about, and I'm interested to get your thoughts on it because he is one of your, I think, favorites over the last couple of years, and you have touted potential moves for him to get out in New York and land with the Kansas City Chiefs, but rumors circulating ahead of the draft that the Jets are interested in maybe moving on from Breece Hall in a trade scenario. Do you think the Jets should be moving on? And the second part of that is, should the Kansas City Chiefs be looking to acquire him?
Yes and yes. We liked both of the backs. Colm, you and I did trade Braylon Allen in one of our RV Triflex leagues at the cut down deadline for basically just late round. I say throwaway. I mean, they're not throwaway. We've discussed why that is, but late round picks that aren't very valuable in terms of the way they're perceived. But Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis, like both of those guys. If you want to add a third back to the mix, you can do that inexpensively again. With Breece Hall, you do have some problems. You've run his value into the ground a little bit, and that's not the thing you want to do right before you trade someone. The new team will eventually have to pay him a pretty decent amount. You have some of the injury issues. His rushing peripherals were terrible last year. You're trying to trade into a market that is about to be flush with all of these elite rookies. All of those things are problematic, and yet you still should be able to get something meaningful for Breece Hall. This is kind of a win-win, right? Where the Jets have some resetting to do. About 20 of the other NFL teams could really use the dynamism that a back like Breece Hall provides, not just as a runner, but in many cases, especially as a receiver. Yeah, it would be the perfect pick for the perfect acquisition for the Kansas City Chiefs. But let's not stop there. It'd be a nice acquisition for a lot of teams. I do like the new direction of the New York Jets, but it's certainly not a good fantasy spot for him.
So I'm going to set you up here. I'm going to give you 4 options. These are the options that have been running through my mind over the last couple of days. And one of them that isn't really going through it's more of the Shawn Siegele plot line is the Kansas City Chiefs. But the Washington Commanders is, I think, in a spot where either through the draft or through trade scenarios that is ideal for a running back to land. And you also have Sean Payton's Denver Broncos looking for a lead running back there. And then the scenario where, you have the Las Vegas Raiders in desperate need of some running back firepower. So out of those places, have you, without your Kansas City Chiefs hat on, which you actually have on while we're recording this, where do you want to see him land?
No, I like those. I think the Raiders have too much work to do to spend
elsewhere
in that manner on a running back, but it is a good fit. Love the mention there with Sean Payton. I mean, Breece Hall is the kind of guy who, we talked so much last year about how they were going to pass to the running backs, how Bo Nix likes to throw the running backs, how Sean Payton likes to throw to the running backs, how it was just this dream fantasy hack and then nothing. And not just nothing, but like
negative.
Yeah, how could you drill down to the center of the earth? I mean, that was not right. So you do wonder a little bit. Andy Reid, for a really long period of time, was the perfect coach for fantasy running backs because he, in theory, threw to the running back way too often. Folks didn't like that back then. The Chiefs have kind of gotten away from that now, partly because they don't have good backs, but also partly because that isn't as necessary. It's not as much of a fit with what Patrick Mahomes does. It would be surprising if that turned out to be the case for Bo Nix, and yet they were very effective on offense last year without having that component. They now have Evan Ingram. They're likely to do something else at some point, I think, to add a little bit more receiving firepower. They have a good pass blocking, specifically offensive line that has allowed him time to throw. He can scramble himself. That part of it, perhaps a little bit underrated in terms of thinking about him. Now we go to the Commanders, and there's some concern that you wouldn't get the same level of high value touches there, at least on a percentage basis, as you might for some other teams. But we know that the Commanders running backs are going to be ridiculously efficient. If you want to see Breece Hall jump from having these terrible crushing peripherals in this frankly horrific situation last year with the Jets to seeing him average 6 yards per carry, look like the best back in the NFL, and move him to the Commanders. Also, I mean, you're going to be threatening 20 touchdowns if he were there. A little bit of an issue with Washington. They have made some moves to trade some of their back-end picks to add in a savvy way to their roster. They have less.
Yeah, they only have 4 picks, I believe, in the draft.
Right. So they probably have to do something creative, maybe prioritize 2026 picks. Is a team like the Jets going to be comfortable with that? Or are the Jets, and one of the things that teams should be doing in many cases is trying to figure out how you can get the most picks over time. And one of the ways to do that is to be patient, right? When you're this close to the draft, do teams want to move their picks in your dynasty league? When we're this close to rookie drafts, do people want to move those picks? No, but you go down the road to 2026 and it becomes easier. The way that you get some of this perpetual reloading to work, and perpetual reloading is a huge part of creating a dynamic reality team as well. The lack of that and the short-term incentives that the people who pull the trigger, who make the decisions at the NFL level, their short-term incentives really cut against building the type of roster that you need to compete with teams that have a Patrick Mahomes or a Lamar Jackson or a Jaden Daniels, Josh Allen, obviously in that mix as well. But if you could show a little bit more patience, and the Jets are a team especially that really is in a spot where they should show patience, yeah, maybe get some 2026 picks, get that perpetual reload going.
So the next question or topic we're going to move into, we got this comment. Some of these questions come in on email, some through Twitter, some through the YouTube channel. So this one came in specifically through the YouTube channel, and it was looking into Sean McVay's thoughts or comments on Tutu Atwell over the last couple of days. McVay saying that he expects Atwell to be on the field a lot more next season, talked about him as a player that he has kind of failed to utilize in the ways that he should. So when we look at the Rams and their depth chart, there's obviously a lot of change there this offseason with the move of Cooper Kupp. They also take in Devontae Adams. They have Puka Nacua back, obviously, and Matthew Stafford back again. But that kind of leaves a situation where, third on the wide receiver depth chart is Tutu Atwell, obviously an undersized receiver coming in the NFL draft, been in the NFL for quite some time now. But have you seen anything from him, Shawn, over the course of his career that would lead you to, be thinking the way that Sean McVay is thinking in terms of we need to get this guy involved more, haven't used him enough? What's your thoughts here as we look to decide and decipher what to do with the LA Rams offense this season?
Yeah. I mean, the Rams, after they draft, are going to come back and tell you that all the players on their roster are, sneaky Pro Bowlers. And because they've had some hits, because of players like Kyron Williams, like in a much bigger way, Puka Nacua, like some of their defensive selections, I mean, they've had enough success, which, stretches to making Super Bowls, winning a Super Bowl, to where they can make these kinds of comments and they're marginally more believable than teams.
I thought you were going to say they can make these comments and they don't seem ludicrous.
Well, I mean, they can get away with them a little more. They still seem pretty silly in many cases. And I think they're also not that believable. I mean, you think to a Jordan Whittington, who came into the NFL last year as a pretty poor prospect, although you could look at the guys that he was with at Texas and say, okay, maybe he didn't do anything at that level because his teammates were so good. He does actually go out and have 2.6 yards per route last season on very low volume. Now, this is the SIS version of that, which doesn't give quite as many routes and has then the effect of inflating that number a little bit compared to what people may be familiar with in some other sources. So keep that in mind. The numbers for Tutu last year at 2.3 were a full yard per route better than where he was in 2023, right? So you look at that and you're thinking, well, maybe he is moving in the right direction. One of the problems for him, however, is that the snap totals were very low last year. And that in some ways
also low in a situation where both wide receivers were missing for quite a big chunk of the season.
Yeah, so that part of it isn't good. He did have a couple of games from week 3 to week 7, 4 games, where the snap percentage was good, but then you look at the full season and just 39%. That's a contrast to back in 2023, where he played 64% of the snaps. But again, in that season, his yard per route numbers were much, much lower. We know that LA is willing to play a lot of these sets where you have the 3 wide receivers. The issue is whether or not that means the third receiver is actually going to be that involved, or how much are you looking for blocking? Now, the departure of Cooper Kupp is fairly straightforward. And also at the same time, that's being replaced by Devontae Adams. You mentioned the departure of Demarcus Robinson there, which is the move that would, in theory, open things up for Atwell. But Atwell has flashed in the past. And one of the things that we have gotten to see a little bit here is that it looks like the Rams want blocking from that position, especially maybe from the receiver who is not going to be targeted anyway. Now, Robinson, we know, went through some flurries where he caught a lot of touchdowns, but other than that, not that involved in the offense. Now, if Atwell could be the guy who goes out and catches a bunch of touchdowns, that would be great. It's a different type of profile. It doesn't seem that likely. Now, they've pulled me in with Atwell before. And one of the reasons that they drafted Atwell, and it even kind of goes back to this idea of why are you drafting guys like Puka, they're looking at some of these advanced college numbers in a slightly different way than maybe some of the teams are. They're willing to go out on a limb and take someone who's incredibly light, who doesn't really have NFL size, and say, well, you have the speed, you have the peripherals from college. This is a guy who could be something. We want to take a flyer on, or in their case, just draft it really early, right? And so they're still looking at that investment and thinking we could get it back. Maybe it is a case where if the defense is trying to account for Puka Nacua and simultaneously trying to account for Devontae Adams, then you now have a chance to get Atwell behind the defense, get some of those splash plays. We know that these explosive plays are at a real premium in the NFL now. They've been so difficult to execute. The Rams would like to do that as opposed to lose a bunch of these plays to, Kyron Williams trying to slog through. Does that mean it's going to work for fantasy? I mean, still probably not, right? You have a lot of indicators suggesting that this is coach speak as opposed to something that would pan out. Now, again, if you're looking at, could you have some individual game explosions that help you in best ball? Maybe that works. I mean, redraft dynasty, there's probably nothing there. Could you have 2 or 3 games where you have a long touchdown and suddenly that really plays up in certain types of best ball formats? I think that is probably realistic.
Yeah, I think as well, this is a move or a player when you talk through the Devontae Adams and Cooper Kupp stuff, and then you have Puka Nacua, that it's a good piece to have in an NFL offense. I don't think it's going to be enough to become relevant for fantasy, but I think from the Rams' point of view, he's a piece that will help the offense, on a week or by week kind of basis, but not put up enough numbers that we need to be overly concerned about him. The next question, Sean, comes in from Zach, and he is looking at a player. He mentions that he hasn't heard us talk a huge amount about. So we have done a lot of the draft shows and talked through a number of the prospects, but he mentions Omarion Hampton. He said he's very interested in your opinion. He said he's in his kind of rookie draft situation, and some of these questions, people will be coming in with more and more questions about the rookie drafts, but he is the 102 and he's stuck between him and Ted McMillan. It doesn't really matter because you're looking here at the running back versus the wide receiver, but it is a super flex tight end premium league, so you can also go the quarterback route in a dynasty format. But he says the consensus seems to be Hampton, but are you at this point, in terms of you're at the 102, are you looking for Ted McMillan? Are you looking at Hampton? And then what are your overall thoughts on Hampton here as we close in on the NFL draft?
Yeah, Ben and I just did a big running back, rookie prospect at the running back position show over on Stealing Bananas. I encourage anybody who's interested in how all these pieces fit together and, big picture talk, some drilling down into specific peripherals, all that kind of thing. It's over there. We did a big section on Hampton. As we think about this question, I would say first we've had McMillan above Hampton throughout our rookie guide process. He's also above Hampton in the rankings that I put out recently. I don't think that you can necessarily go wrong there. And in some ways, there's more risk with the receiver. Even if the receiving profile is elite, you can probably still miss on that. And it's a little bit more of a talent position. Whereas if a team takes Hampton early and you've got a big back with plus athleticism who's been drafted, he's just going to get the touches that it's going to be very hard to lose. You've got a 3-down back. You've got the receiving. Even if he underwhelms, you have a chance to play him to score, to get back out of it. The flip side of it is that McMillan looks like a stud and the rest of the wide receiver class looks awful. It was kind of humorous to chat with Scott about it on OT last week and how he was almost refusing to talk about most of the prospects and saying these guys can't play. I mean, there's just nothing there. Not that they can't play. I mean, we know that people come out of the woodwork. You can have a bad profile and still come through, especially if you have the athleticism. It's a very athletic receiver class. But his point was that the production profiles are very, very weak. And even some of the names, even all of the first round names, the production profiles are very weak. If you have one of those guys pushed down to you at the 202, in some ways you're thinking to yourself, okay, I'm getting a first round receiver here. Even if the analytics aren't great, again, you're kind of locked into a meaningful workload. You're going to get routes. You're going to get forced targets. How bad can Luther Burden, Emeka Egbuka, Matthew Golden, how bad could those guys be? The answer is probably pretty bad. At the same time, the most likely thing is they won't be that bad. And yet, when you're working through it, the running backs who are going to be there at the 202 are so exciting. that if you're kind of close on it, if you're not close, you should just take Hampton, right? But if you're close on it or you need receiver, then I would go with McMillan at the 102, and in the second round, take one of these other running backs that just look really, really good. I mean, the 202 is going to be one of the best running back pick slots in a long time.
Next up is a question about a player who missed huge chunks of last season. It's Chris Olave. Olave entering now, and again, when we look through these, like I talked about Tutu Atwell there a little bit, and you were breaking down his time in the league. Both of these guys drafted the same year. We get Chris Olave going to be turning 25 here when we move into the end of June, but had been healthy through his first 2 seasons, then only played 8 games last year, which obviously crushed his overall numbers on the year. It feels like Chris Olave, Shawn, is much older than 25 years old at this point of his career. It feels like he's been around a lot longer than 3 seasons. But entering year 4, what are your kind of outlook and expectations for him? If we go back to his rookie season, 72 receptions on 120 targets, he had 138 targets. In 2023, 87 receptions, over 1,000 yards both seasons. Then obviously last year with the injuries, just the 32 receptions in 8 games. Are we expecting him to come back to that, target kind of share, 120 plus targets, and hopefully having a big season here in his 4th year?
It's interesting that you say that he seems like he's been in the NFL forever, because I almost have the opposite sensation where I'm like, Chris Olave was good as a rookie and he's barely played, and we're about to get the breakout.
I'm like Chris Olave
and coming.
I'm like Chris Olave and Chris Godwin. They're the same age, right?
No, that's not correct. It's just so
it does happen sometimes where you feel like these guys have been around obviously a long time, or I feel like they've been around a long time or a short time. It's interesting that we have the opposite feeling on the same player here.
Yeah. No, I thought that was fun.
It might have just felt like last season felt like multiple seasons in terms of the time missed, and obviously the concussion issues, which was very concerning, and he got back and then he had another one to miss out in time. So it was a bit of a roller coaster for Chris Olave drafters in 2024.
Well, it may also be that anyone on the Saints feels like they age in dog years, because NFL seasons just last forever. It's so bleak. His profile has a variety of facets that really point strongly in the opposite directions. He was a fascinating prospect because the last season there at Ohio State really made it seem like Garrett Wilson and Jackson Smith-Njigba were far better players. You dig back into the details of his full collegiate time, and it's not as much the case. You're like, he and Garrett Wilson could be very, very similar, even though their numbers to an extent were stepped on by JSN in that last season. There's lots to be excited about here. He's drafted early. The NFL team believed in him. He then comes through, and the numbers right off the bat are fantastic. Anytime that a guy breaks out more or less instantly at the NFL level, I take that as a fantastic sign for his long-term outlook. The issue, I think, with Olave that you definitely saw with the collegiate profile and then has been a little bit disconcerting at the NFL level is that it's almost all before the catch. Now, the fact that you can get vertical and you can get open and you can draw quite a few targets at a decent ADOT, that's all very positive. So it can work in both directions. But I do have a little bit of a fear, and this is one of the fears that I mentioned with Marvin Harrison and what the fit would be with Kyler Murray, and how maybe you're drawing to a little bit narrower path with that type of player where it's before the catch and then potentially at the catch point, but after the catch is a little bit dicier. You're losing some options. And one of the things that we seem to be seeing last year before the injuries just completely wrecked everything was a fit that wasn't as good. And once the targets dropped a little bit, you don't have really anything else to rely on. You have Rashid Shaheed as the downfield threat. He's drawing the vertical targets that you need for Olave. You have questions about the quarterback play. Now, one of the things that I always mention is that when you look at the peripherals for Derek Carr, they're very, very good, right? So that shouldn't be as big a concern, I think, as people want to make it. And yet we still do need to have really strong evidence that in this offense, with Derek Carr, with Chris Olave, that they can make that work and have the total volume that really pushes him. Of course, the context has changed so dramatically because of the injuries that the price now creates an environment where you don't need all of those things for Chris Olave. You more or less just need him to stay healthy. And if those things hit, then you'd be off to the races. Of course, it's this balance of risk versus reward. It's the idea that you could be off to the races that make him an interesting pick, even with all of the injury risk. All of that part is very, very concerning. I'm hoping that for Olave, we could have a similar path to what Brandon Cooks took, where at one point he seemed to be completely done and then actually came back out and played for a long string of games without the concussions being an issue. Now, Cooks was already late enough in his career that he didn't really have much left just in terms of actual NFL production outside of the injury element, but he has been able to stay healthy from that perspective, right? Mostly we don't know. But if you're drafting Olave, you do have to balance this risk and reward situation where the main thing we're hoping with Olave is just that he can stay healthy more for his own health than anything else.
Shawn, obviously we have talked a little bit about the rookies there. You mentioned having the show with yourself and Ben where you talked through the rookie running backs. I would highly recommend people head over and check that out as well on the Stealing Bananas feed. Lots of content though going up on the RotoViz website. Most of it, from Kevin. You mentioned before we kicked off that you were after publishing a piece by Blair Andrews. Anything that you want to highlight that the listeners should be heading over and checking out?
Yeah, Kevin's been doing an absolutely fantastic job. Anything that he does, you want to get in there and take a closer look. Blair has put out the big pre-draft running back prospect lab piece today. That one, always so much fun. It goes through all the top prospects, all these guys in the middle, a bunch of names who might not even be drafted. And then in addition to going through, getting the scores, getting understanding for, why the score is what it is, where you should trust it, maybe where you should bet against it. But we also have lots of other peripherals in there as well. Discussion of how these guys fit, what the algorithm doesn't know, all of those types of things. You'll want to check that out. And if nothing else, really familiarize yourself with the running backs through the big piece that I put out somewhat recently, the 4-round mock, the show with Ben that we just discussed, this piece from Blair. You can set yourself up very nicely to dominate any pre-draft trades, because one of the things that you want to do before it gets to the NFL draft is move into position to take the guys that you want, but then also to prepare yourself for a good understanding of where the guys are pre-draft. If you don't have a good baseline for understanding their prospects, then the risk to you, the threat, is that you'll move someone too much once you see the draft slot, once you see the landing position and what that seems like it means in terms of workload. Having the right baseline is absolutely key to making the correct decisions. Once you have this additional information, we're going to get here in just a couple weeks.
Yeah, so head on over and check that out up on rotoviz.com. If you are signing up, you can use the code RVRadio2025 at checkout to get yourself a 10% discount off a RotoViz NFL Pass. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on socials at Overtime Ireland. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. Check all of his work up on rotoviz.com. And until we are back, have a good one.